When it comes to Nimrod, which you described in great lengths in your book, what is basically, if you can summarize, please, how is he related or responsible to the reappearance of giants?
Yeah, okay. So what we see in Nimrod is a picture of someone who is in blatant defiance and opposition to God, someone who is looking to empower themselves. It says that he became a mighty one. The Hebrew there is Gibor. Uh, that word was first used three times in the Genesis 6 narrative to describe the giants. So it is very intentional. In fact, in the Septuagint, it just comes right out and says that Nimrod became a giant. Okay, so there's the not only a literary connection there, but it's very intentional about stating that there is this connection that comes through Nimrod. So then we have to try and figure out what is the nature of that and how does it work. And this is where it's uh, it's probably the hardest piece of the puzzle to put together. This idea that Nimrod did something that made him become a giant. Okay, because he's not born like that. He becomes a giant, and the connotations behind the Hebrew there in the text is the translation says he began to be a mighty one. That Hebrew term for began is halal. It's a homograph, right? So there's two different words that look the same, spelt the same, sound the same, but they're two different words. One means began, and the other means defiled. And you can see examples of that usage if you want to do a bit of a word search there. Um, Interestingly, the history of interpretation on that passage never excludes one of those options. It always presents both, right? Because we got to remember that the scriptures are supposed to be understood from listening. Okay, in biblical times, it wasn't like everybody had their own Bible. Instead, you were listening to somebody reading the text, and as they read the text, you hear these words being spoken, and you have to actually decide, oh, is that the word that means began, or is that the word that means defiled? And you get it from the immediate context, but then you also have to think, well, the author was very intentional about using that word because they know it sounds like this other word. So there's this dual level of meaning there that works on both levels. And when you come across instances of that in the text, and that's not the only one, this is a common literary device for Israelite authors. Uh, the idea is that you need to consider both, and you need to take both into account and consider how they work together. So the idea that Nimrod became a giant extends then into some kind of means by which he defiled himself. When we look at biblical definitions of defilement, we're often talking about ritual and witchcraft and that kind of thing. So, in some way, these elements combine to tell us something about what Nimrod was doing. And we don't get the exact practice spelled out, which is probably for our benefit, because imagine what people would do if they knew how to make themselves into giants. That'd be horrible. Um, but it's made clear enough in the text that something went on there that resulted in Nimrod becoming a giant, and then he figured some way to spread that amongst the people of the world, which is the whole point of the Tower of Babel story. So, having made that connection there, it just follows that as you read Genesis 11, you're seeing the proliferation of this corruption of humanity, which is then spreading through the world. And that leads into the introduction of Abraham as the person who's going to begin acting as God's representative on the earth to begin to undo the problems created there.